Doctor, amid all this concern and all, we are whatever Tamil people benefited or in some kind of a concession in the spheres of reconciliation, it happened. There's a belief it happened because of the international pressure, but in especially India also, because whatever during the previous term, the election, provincial council election happened, and the Manic Fam, the people resettled. All this happened due to the international pressure. But now, today you might have heard this news that there was a protest by TNA-led parties against the poaching of Indian fishermen. In a diplomatic in the diplomatic arena, how will this play? We are the Tamil people depend on India's support for power devolution, but actually voicing against the Indian people, how this will play in the geopolitical game.
Well, the Indian fishing boats are not representing the Indian state. So the elected representatives of the Tamil people have to represent the interests of the Tamil fishing community, whose livelihoods and lives are being threatened by bottom trawling. So I think that it's very commendable, and it's long overdue that this protest is a good thing, because the representatives of the Tamil people have to stand up for the economic welfare and well-being and survival of an important section of the Tamil community. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is that I still haven't seen, and this is not on the issue of the fisher folk, I haven't seen any dialogue with the new Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. I mean, surely the TNA and the other Tamil parties could not have forgotten the history of successful Tamil diplomacy. I remember meeting Mr. Amithalingam and his wife, Mange Karse Amithalingam, in Chennai. At that time, it was still Madras. Mr. Suresh Premachandran would remember. We used to go and meet K. Padmanabha, Suresh and I, Ketish Loganathan. We used to meet Mr. Amithalingam often. But now there is no effort, unlike in the 1980s, to work with the very important and very smart Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, the son, of course, of Mr. Karunanidhi, who was a very important player, the famous rivalry MGR-Karunanidhi. Finally, MGR prevailed as the patron of the Tamil groups and so on. But Mr. Karunanidhi, I think, had a more balanced approach. That's another story. But still, M.K. Stalin is a very important player, and I don't see any Indian, Sri Lankan Tamil politician, except for young Mr. Thanaman, I think, from the hill country, who bothered to go and meet him. And without his input in Delhi, of course, Delhi is concerned about the 13th Amendment and, of course, about Chinese influence even in the north and east. But I don't see how one can bypass the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu and hope to rally Indian political opinion in defense of the 13th Amendment.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, you mentioned about meeting Sumantran and all. Then Sumantran, during an interview with me, said that the lessons that we learned from the Afghanistan pullover by the America, that we should not over dependent on the Western powers for a solution for Tamil people. So the whatever the pressure can come from there, but the solution should be developed within the country. And will the Western powers abandon the Tamil people? What will happen?
Well, whatever my differences of opinion over time with Mr. Sumandran, I consider him one of the smartest politicians. He and young Rasamanikam and Gajan Ponnambalam, very, very smart, very sharp politicians and parliamentarians. So they're very intelligent people, very able, excellent speakers. I would say that Mr. Sumandran is right, but you have to get it exactly right, formulation. The United States, like the great democracy that it is, the United States will be affected and influenced by its own internal political processes. So there could be times in which they pull out of places, as they did in Afghanistan. The Pakistanis got drawn into this whole thing, as Imran Khan says, and President Musharraf said before that, because of the Americans. And look what happened to Pakistan. So you have to understand, I mean, I'm a great admirer of the United States. I think that in the struggle of systems, that is governance models between the United States and China, Sri Lanka naturally belongs with the United States because we have been the oldest democracy, not only in Asia, but in the Afro-Asian continents. So that's my view. But I'm also a realist. The United States will pull out. But India won't pull out because this is where India is. And there are 80 million Tamil people in India. So in terms of an external strategy, nobody can bypass India. I mean, there are voices in the Tamil community. I've heard Mr. Vigneswaran saying we'll go to America directly, and some others are supposed to be saying we'll go to China and so on. China is far away, but I can assure you that whether it's the United States or anyone else, including Russia, which sells a lot of weapons to India, they are not going to make any move on Sri Lanka without the concurrence of India, and India will always be the lead actor. Now, this is the lesson. You don't have to look at Afghanistan. Look at the lesson that President Jayatilleka learned in the 1980s. He was so close to President Reagan, and they expected the United States and Britain to support the Sri Lankan state. But what President Reagan did was he sent his special envoy, General Vernon Walters, to Sri Lanka. And Vernon Walters said, well, we can introduce you to the Israelis, so they'll give you some help. But you have to settle with India. So tactically, yes, we can hook you up with Tel Aviv at that time, not Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. And that happened. But that's tactical. That'll keep you going. But you have to settle with New Delhi. And finally, when the airdrop took place, Sri Lanka found that there was nobody willing to speak up for Sri Lanka in the Security Council. I mean, China said something, but that's it. Nobody was going to do that. So that was the case in the 1980s when there was a problem between the United States and India. Nonetheless, the United States said, you settle with India, because India is recognized as the preponderant regional power. That is the reality. So no one can expect that, I don't know what's being said out there, but even if Kamala Harris or MIA becomes the vice president or president, I mean, she's the vice president, becomes the president of the United States, no way the United States is going outside or beyond or further than what India says. And India says the 13th Amendment for now. Now, if the Sri Lankan government completely overturns it, one doesn't know what dynamics will ensue and what India will feel. But even if India plays a dynamic role, the final settlement will be the 13th Amendment, because that's what they can justify. There's a bilateral relationship, an accord. And if the Sri Lankan government tears it up, well, then moves will be made, but it will finally settle, the needle will settle at the 13th Amendment. So this has to be understood, and the centrality of India has to be understood. That doesn't mean that the Tamil people, as Sumandran said, should not generate strength within the country, but that strength will depend on unity, on a broad, on a united front of the Tamil political parties and leadership, saying one thing to India, which then India can take to the rest of the world, and the same thing to the rest of the world. And that should be the full implementation of the 13th Amendment. And don't say, well, as a first step, and this and that and the other, because then the Sri Lankan government will say we can't come to a final settlement because these guys just want this for something else. That is a matter for another time and another generation, not now. Lord Salisbury, when C. Sundaralingam wrote to him in 1964, he apologized. He said, maybe I made some mistakes in my expectations at that time, but the best thing I can tell you is to learn from Northern Ireland and work with, he mentioned the UNP at that time, now there's no UNP, work with the democratic opposition in the Sri Lankan parliament. So I would say those are the three things. India, and through India, the world. There's no other way to Washington, no better way to Washington. I mean, you can have lobbies. Who cares? The road to Washington is through Delhi, if you're serious. Basically, the road to almost anywhere is through Delhi. There's no other road. Not for the Tamils, not for the Sinhalese, not for the Sri Lankan government. If it wants to talk to Washington, it had better go through Delhi. But it learned that. It thinks that it can play all kinds of games, with the Americans and with the Chinese and so on. It won't work. The road lies through Delhi, out of off this island. That's the road. That's one. Two, political unity around the defense of the 13th Amendment and the implementation of the 13th Amendment of the Tamil political, the Tamil polity, the Tamil political parties and social movements like the P2P. But that never consolidated around a moderate program. And the third is an alliance with the South. That alliance cannot be on the basis of going beyond the 13th Amendment because there won't be any takers. Not the JVP, they haven't said a word even about devolution. Not the SJB, they will support and defend the 13th Amendment, but I don't think they'll go beyond. And the UNP is kind of dead. It doesn't even have a single elected representative, only a token. So that should be the triangular, trident strategy at this very dangerous moment.
Doctor, since you mentioned about this, I would like to ask you, about the full implementation of 13th Amendment. The government, actually in some government circles, there's a fear factor that this will be used as a stepping stone for a separate country kind of a thing. So now I want to ask you that is this a real concern? Because once LTT had artillery powers, the planes and the naval force and everything. Now that powerful LTT is destroyed, but now the government is going after people posting some about LTT, about birthday post of remembering Prabhakar and those things. They are arresting them. That recently I also asked Mr. Pillayan during an interview that you all are the big commanders in the LTT, like you, Karuna, Kumaran, Padmanathan are out now. But those who actually posted something on their social media inside the prison for 6 months, more than 6 months, they are there. So is this concern about the revival of LTT is a legitimate concern, or this is to this has been used to prevent giving powers to Tamil people?
Well, those are two separate things. One is to do with the revival of the LTT. Now, I don't think arresting people who are putting posters has anything to do with that revival. It is to do with the political intolerance on the part of this particular regime You know that the head of the Inter-University Students, IUSF, the Inter-University Students Front, has been in jail now for months, simply for a demonstration. And it's not just him, there are several others. Southern University activist, Vasanta Mudalige is the name of this young chap, just locked up. The teachers are now being threatened if they don't return to work on the 21st, and threatened by the Minister of Public Security, no less. So this is to do with the general atmosphere of intolerance. It is possible that there is some allergy on the part of the government. I told you that the regime is distinct from the cabinet. The cabinet is one thing. The actual power structure consists of the president, the military, the police, ex-military, ex-police, and the ultra-nationalist groupings associated with the Viet Maga and the Elia Caucasus. So maybe there's an allergy, and maybe it's a need to show power and dominance, which is why the memorial at the University of Jaffna was smashed when there was nothing obviously LTT about the symbolism of that memorial. But as for the existence or residual existence or revival of the LTT, we now have reports from Indian intelligence that there has been some activity and some arrests. So I will not dismiss that out of hand. That's not helpful because it only helps the hardliners in the government. It won't help at all. Now, the other aspect of this is the 13th Amendment, whether it's a stepping stone to separatism. Well, somebody will have to show me some country where you had devolution within a unitary state, and that was the reason for separation. On the contrary, devolution of power, making for a reasonable measure of autonomy and self-administration in any country, is a vaccine against separatism. And if the 13th Amendment could have been used for separation, then Mr. Prabhakaran would have used it. After all, in September 1987, the interim administration was appointed by President Javadana at the request, or I would say the strong request, of then High Commissioner J.N. Dixit. And of the 11 members, 8 were Mr. Prabhakaran's nominees. And yet he rejected it. And that was because of the understanding that this is not, in fact, a stepping stone to separation. That was the mistake he made, and eventually he paid with that with his life for making that mistake, because in any other part of the world, an ethnic minority or minority nationality would have accepted that and built on it. Now in Scotland, we have a situation when the people of Scotland are even asking for their own sovereignty. But where did it start? It started with the Scottish office. It doesn't mean that it was automatically a stepping stone to separation, but it gives a community time to build up and decide whether it wants to stay or whether it wants to leave. And it enables the other people also a chance, but it takes decades. Then you have the Northern Ireland situation where there's no such thing. You had the Good Friday Agreement. There was no accountability in the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday, the IRA, Irish Republican Army, accepted settlement in which Britain still remained a monarchy nominally. It's not a republic, not even federal, let alone a republic. But they accepted that. And they have adopted a strategy of not of Northern Ireland breaking away. Now the question has arisen because England decided to leave Europe through Brexit. But otherwise, what the IRA did was it used its strength, it worked the institutions in the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland and established a strong base in the Republic of Ireland, that's the South, to build itself up as a national force. And this was the strategy of Martin McGuinness. And I have asked, I interviewed Martin McGuinness twice, I liked him very much, and I asked Mr. Samadhan once, more than once, including on the day that Mr. Vigneshwaran was swearing in before we sat down for lunch. I said, why is it that what is good enough for the Catholic minority of Northern Ireland is not good enough for the Tamil minority of Northern Sri Lanka? So, this issue, the 13th Amendment is not automatically a stepping stone for separation, but that's no reason to fear it as the Sri Lankan government does. I think it's all that is achievable. It has been proved that is the only thing that is achievable, and now even that looks like it might disappear. So it has to be held on to very quickly by everybody concerned, including Democrats in the South, not just the North.
Doctor, you mentioned that within the government circle, certain officials, they want to have the geopolitical, their political sighting with certain superpowers. But with the present Sri Lankan economic situation, even if they want to do so, they cannot go like that. They have to actually work with all the superpowers in order to find a middle path. Now, with this, recently the emergence of the uh, AUKUS, AUKUS,
Caucus,
yeah,
AUKUS.
with in that establishment of the trilateral defense agreement, what kind of implications for Sri Lanka? Because see, after that, Sri Lankan government gave the Kerala Petiya to America. I'm not connecting both because of that this happened, but this is all happened within this time period. What will happen in this while the Scott that four countries agreement is there now, this new agreement came, and how this will play in the background of Sri Lanka?
Well, it all depends on your perception. We have to understand, I mean, and take whether it's the Sinhalese or the Tamils. We have had a strange situation, maybe because we are an island, that sometimes the Sinhalese and sometimes the Tamils see things that are not there. They imagine things, imagine their powers and capabilities. Now, in April 2003, there was a big meeting scheduled to be held in Tokyo, and the LTT was invited. The LTT decided not to go. Any other guerrilla group anywhere in the world, including Al Qaeda, if they had been invited, they would have gone, because there were many, many countries and donor institutions that would have been present. But Mr. Prabhakaran thought that, well, we have the strength to do what we want and we can dictate the terms. As it turned out, that was a fatal error. So similarly, on the southern side, there is a lack of realism. I often think that this is our equivalent of the Prabhakaran experience. Not that it's a guerrilla movement, but that same ultra-nationalist sort of deluded mentality. In the case of the LTT and Prabhakaran, they thought they could kill Rajiv Gandhi and there would be no consequence. That India would not wait patiently and then make sure that that the justice was done. And that the Sinhalese would always be defeated and so on, though it was a majority and all it took was the right leader. So similarly, this is we are going through our Prabhakaran experience. And I remember my friends in the north, including very well educated, foreign educated people who felt that that's fine, nothing can stop us and so on. So here in the south, in the government, by government, I repeat, I don't necessarily mean the cabinet. I mean the president and the real power wielders, whom you see sometimes in the presidential task forces and so on. They don't seem to have looked at a world map. Because if you look at a world map, you can see, you just draw lines of the Quad. And then you draw the AUKUS lines. And then you will see that where we are located, and we are always going to be located here, there is no way that anyone can match the preponderance of military force that India and its partners can bring to bear in this theater of the Indian Ocean. India alone, but now India is not alone. India is in alliance with the United States and with Japan and with Australia, and there's another new alliance which India is not included in. But the preponderance of force, or what's known as the military balance or the theater balance in the region, is overwhelmingly unmatchable by China in the Indian Ocean. Now, if you're taking the northern tier of India, that's another story, but we are not located there. We are Pakistanis. Because China, there's a contiguous route from China through to Pakistan. And the Chinese have done some building in Bhutan, and that northern tier, now with Afghanistan, there's a disadvantage for India. But to the south, there is no question. Now, this is not really understood by those in power in Colombo at this moment, just as the reality was not understood by those in power in Jaffna and later Mullaitivu at a certain period of the history of the Tamil people. So, having defeated the LTT, they have now taken over the mentality of triumphalism. We beat. I remember the LTT very well. I mean, we beat the IPK. Who can't we beat? And here it is, we beat the LTT, which beat the IPK. So what can't we do? And we have our friends, the Chinese, are now the world's second great power. They are with us. So what the ruling elite, the power elite, that is the president and the ex-military people and the ultra-nationalists, not the PM and the cabinet, what they seem to be thinking is we'll make tactical concessions to the Americans and the Indians and all these other fellows, let them come and go. We'll have military exercises. But our strategic relationship will remain with China. Now, I'm saying this not because I'm guessing. A recent article in the newspapers by the ambassador of China to Sri Lanka had a very truthful statement. I mean, a very truthful article. And in that, he points out that he says President Xi Jinping and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa have had 2 telephone conversations in which they have given strategic guidance about their relationship. Then he talks about the Prime Minister and China and the Speaker of the House in China and so on and so forth. Now, the President of Sri Lanka said on 2 occasions that he wants to learn the governance experience of the Communist Party of China. Learn the governance model. Now, no Sri Lankan leadership has ever said that, not even when there was such a close personal friendship between the Bandaranayakas and Premier and later Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai during the time of Chairman Mao. So the strategic and may I say the grand strategic relationship that Colombo has is with Beijing. The tactical relationships, this is theater, just juggling. It's a show. Is okay. You come, you can have the Western pier and something else. But in the mind and through actual action, the Chinese have the greatest preponderance of influence on Sri Lanka. Now, the irony is this: Sri Lanka is supposedly in the sphere of influence of India, in the Indian Ocean. But if you take Sri Lanka, the island of Sri Lanka, as a sphere of influence, the preponderant power, the preponderant influence is China. So there's a mismatch there. And on India's southern doorstep. On the northern tier, there is a clear power projection of China. And on the southern doorstep, there's an entrenched Chinese preponderance. And a tie-up, a very close tie between the president and his inner circle and President Xi in Beijing. So I think that in Colombo, the ruling circles think that we can be like Pakistan or maybe Myanmar. Who knows if it becomes too unpopular? That maybe we can do a Myanmar, or be like Cambodia. China has these allies, Pakistan, which of course is now a democracy, but the influence of the military is entrenched. Then there's Cambodia, which is hardly a practicing democracy. And there's Myanmar, which is a military junta. So, in the mindset of the Sri Lankan rulers, they've openly said that in the governance model. I think everybody should learn from the economic miracle that China has performed, but the governance model, that's good for China. Fine, it has served China's purposes, it kept China united. But we have always been a democracy, a practicing, flourishing democracy. We have nothing to learn from the governance model of the Communist Party of China, and I admire the Communist Party of China. But that's in China, not in Sri Lanka. So I think there's a delusional mindset on the part of the Sri Lankan rulers of the day. And I think, as in the case of Mr. Prabhakaran and the LTT, that will prove to be a very expensive delusion. Sorry. Audio.
Okay. Doctor, my final question, that whatever
Yes.
the past, there is always a chance to recorrect, course
Yes.
correction in the future. So now, within the next few months and years, what will be the key challenges Sri Lanka might face in order to overcome? What are the short term, middle term, and long term actions the government should take in order to overcome those challenges?
Well, the possibility of course correction exists only if the leading force, is capable of such course correction. Once again, I come to the question of the LTT. In 1995, in my first book published by Vikas New Delhi about Sri Lanka, I predicted in print that the Tigers have themselves killed the Elam struggle. And I gave a reason. I said, when you are an arithmetical minority, and when you kill off fellow fighters for your own cause, then you're diminishing your own numbers, and eventually the fact that there's a majority on the other side will defeat you. So if you do that, you are ending your own struggle. The book is called The Travails of Democracy. It was published by Vikas New Delhi in 1995. Now, it's also true of the present regime in Sri Lanka and the Sinhalese, the LTT equivalent or the Prabhakaran equivalent, the militarist equivalent. Look what has happened. It's not about COVID. It's not about the global economic crisis. Overnight, the president of Sri Lanka decided that the rural peasantry of Sri Lanka cannot receive chemical fertilizer, weedicides, and pesticides. Therefore, this is a very important part of Sri Lankan society, the Sri Lankan population, the Sri Lankan economy, and of course the electoral power base of the Rajapaksas. The peasantry is now on the streets, in the fields. They are protesting. This is in the Sinhala heartland. I saw yesterday on television news, they took, one guy came forward and said, I am a voter, I voted for the Pohottua. And now I am ashamed of that. And they went and they took a billboard which had the photographs of all the Rajapaksas, because of obviously some project was open. And this billboard is not just a wooden one, it was aluminium, and it had metal anchorage, metal rods. The protesters uprooted that and turned it. First they held it up and they hit the pictures. Then they turned it upside down. These are Sinhala Buddhist peasants. This is the base of the regime. And in fact, most of the Sri Lankan army comes from the peasant families. Now, this was done by the leadership of the country. So how can you course correct? You can course correct when there's, you've made a mistake, you're willing to admit the mistake and make a course correction. But did the LTT ever course correct? Never. I mean, tactically improved some, from one type of mortar, one type of mine, it went to another type of mortar, big Baba mortar and something else, and then it had good artillery, but never course correction, which is what Anton Balasingham said. Look, we have to change because the entire international environment has changed. They didn't listen to him because he was Balasingham. Prabhakaran allowed him to go without harming him. That famous last trip, I think it was 2003. 2003 or so. When he came on the seaplane, there was a meeting of the Tiger.
Oh, yeah.
So similarly here, the mindset is such that there is no course correction. I mean, it's all about we did this, we did that. Now, President Gotabaya went on Army Day, 72nd Army Day, to the home base of his regiment, the Gajba Regiment in Salipura. And he made a speech about the Constitution. I mean, you don't go to the army and make a speech about civilian matters like constitutions and agrarian policy. And he spoke about his commanding officer. He said he learned everything about leadership. They learned from that commanding officer, famous General Vijay Vimalratna. Now, he didn't say I learned everything I know about leadership from my brother Mahendra Rajapaksa. He's a Lieutenant, he's a General Vijay Vimalratna. Now, General Vijay Vimalratna was a brilliant soldier, but hard charging, driving, that's fine for war. But for politics, economics, diplomacy, now you can't adopt the same attitude to the Sinhala peasantry. And if the harvest collapses in the next 45 days, their incomes will disintegrate, the rural economy will disintegrate, there won't be food in the urban areas. So how can you course correct when you have a dogmatic mentality? The same kind of mentality that we saw in the north, which led to complete devastation. So since it's not a war, I don't think it'll end in that way, but it cannot end well because the mentality it's a closed mindset. The collective mindset is a closed militaristic mindset, just like the LTT. That is the difference between the IRA and the LTT. Because the IRA had a long-standing political wing, the Sinn Féin, which was in fact very old. But not the LTT. The LTT was an army, a militia, that then occasionally had a political wing and then shut down its own political wing. It's the same thing you have here. President himself says, I'm not experienced in politics. So he brings that militarist mentality. This is the other side of the same war, 30 years. Now with the turn of the South, in 2019, 2020, it went up, the Sinhala, triumphalism. This is the man, we don't want democracy, we need a strong leader. The same thing that happened in the North, the same thing. But of course, because democracy has been practiced for a long time in the South, much longer than in the North, in that sense, because there was never no dictator of right or left was allowed in the South. There's always something that happens. So the turn has been much faster than in the North. Much faster, the turn downhill, the downturn. But we are going through the same experience and it will end up in the same way. I don't think there will be a course correction.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for that elaborate answer. You actually gave your precious time, more than 1 hour with us. Thank you very much, Doctor.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
I hope to interview again when another important event happened. So thank you very much.